My name is Jackson Stokes, and together with my collaborators from the University of Washington, we'd like to present our work on language formality in security and privacy interfaces. Imagine you're designing a security prompt for your company, which is meant to convince individuals to not reuse their passwords. When suggesting this to the user, is it better to use casual, approachable language, or is it better to use authoritative, formal language to convey the seriousness of the action? These decisions are made every day during interface design across platforms. In this work, we'd like to shed some light on how these design choices can be made. Let's discuss why we bring this up. Security and privacy prompts, such as suggesting password use, are important parts of encouraging good user security behavior. In these prompts, platforms must encourage a broad audience that the relevant security action is important, while still making it clear to understand and act on. Prior work has shown that security and privacy interface design can impact compliance. Additionally, aspects of language such as formality and dialect have been shown to affect a user's likelihood to understand and follow requests. This leads to our two research questions. First, do people perceive the language formality of security and privacy prompts to be different across platforms? And second, does the language formality of these prompts impact whether people intend to comply with them? First, let's clarify what we mean by formality. Several elements can combine to make text more or less formal, including diction, politeness, and authoritativeness. As an example of different diction, consider the examples, "It's a good idea to use a strong password" versus "It's imperative to use a robust password." For politeness, consider the examples, "Read the terms below" versus "Please take the time to read the terms." And finally, to illustrate authoritativeness, we have the examples, "Consider avoiding common words when writing your password" versus "Do not use common words in your password." In order to answer these questions, we began by collecting an extensive dataset of 1,817 strings from security and privacy prompts across 13 platforms. Our collection ranges from 363 strings taken from Google's products and services to 31 strings taken from Reddit. This range represents the scale of security and privacy interfaces on these various sites. In order to make our dataset easier to operationalize, two researchers coded strings for language styles associated with formality and request types. First, we coded the tone, placing the strings into three categories: casual tone, which contains colloquial language and contractions; authoritative tone, which usually commands something; or professional tones, which tend to use restrained, polite language. We also coded strings that contained a request based on how that request was presented. Commands imply that the user must perform the action. Requests simply ask, but could be ignored, and optional choices explicitly lay out the choices a user could make. Finally, we introduced a code to mark whether a string contains technical language. Technical language may be language that is specific to digital counts or computer setting, such as USB security keys. Next, let's talk about the experimental study we ran using our dataset. In order to collect a reliable metric for the formality and likelihood of compliance for each string, we ran an experimental study on a selected group of 135 strings across companies. Two researchers selected these strings to get a balanced, diverse group of strings from the dataset. Using these strings, we then crafted three sections of our online study. First, participants rate a small random subset of these strings on formality. Following this was a matching game stage where participants guessed the platform of origin of a string. This was included to engage participants and assess a confounding factor of predicting platform. And finally, participants rate a different small random sample on their likelihood of compliance with the requested action. Specifically, the ratings we collected were based on a 5-point Likert style scale for formality and intended compliance, as shown on the right. After removing participants who didn't complete the study and pass the attention check, we were left with data from 512 participants. This amounts to over 6,100 ratings for formality and compliance each. In order to answer both of our research questions, we constructed mixed effects linear regression models based on our data. First, to understand if perceived language formality is different across platforms, we modeled formality as a continuous dependent variable to the platform of origin as an independent variable. To evaluate the effect that our codes had on rated formality, we also included the prompt's tone code request type code, and the presence of technical language, all as independent variables in the model. For our second research question, we analyze whether the formality of prompts impacts whether people intend to comply by modeling compliance as it relates to the average formality of that prompt, along with the type of prompt and our dataset codes as independent variables. Let's view our results. First, we confirm a hypothesis that people perceive the formality of security prompts as different across companies. In our regression model predicting formality, we see that both platform of origin and prompt length have significant main effects on perceived formality. Age and education also play a role, albeit with less significant main effects. Here we can see a chart representing the formality of various platforms, as well as some examples of how Google, Apple, and Amazon convey similar prompts with various levels of formality. In our second model, we find that formality has a significant positive effect on intent and compliance. To illustrate, consider the chart of prompts suggesting stronger password use. While this chart only shows strong password prompts for clarity purposes, this trend is similar for other prompt types seen in our study. Again, we have some examples of different prompts at various levels of formality. To conclude, in this work, we set out to understand how people perceive the formality of the language used in account security and privacy strings, and how this language influences their intention to comply with these prompts. Our user study confirmed our hypothesis that platforms use different levels of formality in their communication with users, and that these different levels of formality impact users' intentions to comply with the suggested practices. This work contributes to the growing body of knowledge around security interface and design. There are a few implications that can be drawn on from this work. First, we see that formality matters in interface design. Not only is it an important part of company voice, as shown by the confirmation of our first research question, we also see that the changes in formality of prompts may have downstream effects on user compliance, as shown by the confirmation of our second research question. We'd like to thank the participants who make this work possible, as well as the National Science Foundation and Google for funding this work. Thank you.